According to the Gina Davis Institute, between 2016 and 2023, only 3.9% of characters on television had some form of a disability. Of those characters, only 21% were played by an actor who had the same or a similar disability. Characters who were white were 1.5 times as likely to be disabled when compared to characters of color. Characters with a disability are also significantly less likely to be shown working. In contrast to these stats, in real life, around 16% of the world is disabled in some way. But even with this difference, there still aren't very many positive examples of disability or neurodiversity within television, or any form of media for that matter. Why then is it so important that we have positive representations of disability? When most disabled people turn on a show or a movie, they won't see someone who represents them at all. It will be harder for them to relate to the characters and to believe that they can accomplish what the characters in the story can. However, once they finally do find a disabled character, they're the villain, or their disability makes them freakishly superpowered, or they're treated differently from the non disabled characters within that same piece of media. There are even more ways this could go wrong, which I will get into in a moment. These negative aspects of the characters can also have the same effect as not having a disabled character at all. It makes it difficult for actual disabled people to see themselves in these characters when they are treated as monsters or freaks. In fact, this could even lead to disabled people developing a negative view of themselves and their disability. So, in the future, how can creators avoid these issues with representations of disability? In other words, what makes a negative representation and what makes a positive one? First, I'll talk about some different ways a representation can be seen as negative. The most obvious example of a negative representation of disability is the villain. Having your only disabled character violently murder people? Yeah, that doesn't really leave a great impression. This sends the message to non disabled people that disabled people are dangerous, and it sends the message to disabled people that they're evil monsters. There are dozens and dozens of examples of this. You have the Joker, who isn't necessarily diagnosed with anything, but he definitely has problems regulating his emotions and his actions. He also, kills people. Like a lot of people. Like, a lot. There's also Captain Hook, who's missing a hand. Darth Vader, who uses a respirator and also has all of his limbs amputated very violently. And Scar and Voldemort, who have facial disfigurements. In contrast to this, there's the trope of the disabled character with superpowers. At first glance, this actually seems like a positive representation. The character is able to do fantastic things and is seen as a hero. However, the reason this is a negative trope is because there are many instances of shows or movies using the character's disability as the superpower. This sends the message that disabled people should be treated differently or that they aren't valuable to society unless they can do the things that non disabled people can't. One of the biggest examples of this is Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. Matt is a blind man who uses accessible tools such as Braille and text to speech to read, as well as a blind cane to walk, but that's really where the positive aspects of his depiction end. When he was blinded at age 9, his other senses were heightened. He uses these heightened senses to essentially see using a combination of what he can hear, smell, touch, and taste. It lets him see well enough to the point he actually doesn't need the blind cane he uses or any other assistance to walk. It's all for show. Although this doesn't mean he can see everything, hence the Braille and the text to speech, but it also allows him to do things that no human can do, such as hear things from miles away or detect if someone is lying through their heartbeat. He uses all of these abilities to be a crime-fighting vigilante. Unfortunately, this creates a false perception of blind people and what they can and can't do. It also treats blind people like they're special or superhuman for their disability. Another common negative trope is having a character revealed to be faking their disability. This is particularly common with wheelchair users. It is estimated that around 1/3 of wheelchair users are ambulatory, meaning they can walk or stand for a short amount of time, but they still use their wheelchair to make it easier to move long distances. When characters are faking their disability and it's revealed in this way, it invalidates the experience of actual ambulatory wheelchair users by claiming that there's no chance that a wheelchair user could ever stand even for a moment, or that these disabilities aren't actually serious and are something that can be joked about or used for show. Some examples of this are seen in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where Willy Wonka pretends to be limping and then reveals it was all for show. Another example of this is in the first episode of Detective Conan, also known as Case Closed, a show that only like 4 people in the United States have watched. In the first scene, this guy
I'm Shinichi Kudo, a high school detective.
solves a murder in which the culprit would have had to jump between two ledges in order to commit the crime. Since he's in a wheelchair, this old man is ruled out as a suspect. But then, Shinichi does this.
Only one truth prevails.
How did you do that?
Damn reflexes!
And reveals that he was faking, and also the true murderer. Wow, a double whammy.
Alright, let's get out of here before SNL starts.
The final negative trope I want to talk about is being suddenly or miraculously cured of a disability. This happens frequently in the fantasy and sci-fi genre, typically with some kind of magic spell, but it can happen anywhere. This trope implies that disabilities should be cured or overcame, when in reality, there are many disabled people living happy lives with their disability and they would never change it. Some examples of this trope are the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, who has the equivalent of some kind of disfigurement. At the end, he's transformed back to normal, and only then can Belle kiss him and decide to spend the rest of her life with him. This also happens to Nessa Rose in the Broadway version of Wicked, though this was thankfully changed for the movie version. This final example wasn't cured with magic, but instead it was brushed under the rug. Henrietta Wilson from the show 911 on ABC recently developed
dermatomyositis
from being exposed to high amounts of radiation in space without a spacesuit. Yes, she is a firefighter, and yes, this show is silly. Hen struggled with a rash on the back of her hands, muscle weakness, fatigue, hand tremors, and even fainting spells. For a while, she hid this from the rest of her firehouse, but once she fainted on the job and she was diagnosed, her captain had to fire her due to Hen being a danger to herself and others. If she faints in the middle of a fire, her and everyone in that building could die. The autoimmune disease Hen has is completely incurable, but it can be managed through frequent exercise, healthy eating, and other stuff. Through this, Hen becomes well enough to come back to work. But in the 6 episodes that have aired since then, Hen has shown 0 symptoms of her disease. Not even in a throwaway line. None of the main characters have even mentioned that this was something she was struggling with, despite it affecting her severely for months. As of now, the show is acting like her diagnosis barely even happened. This is a disability that should be impacting her daily life and her work, as it is incurable and it can flare up at any time. Having her disease become such a big part of her character and her arc for 3 to 4 episodes just to never acknowledge it again tells disabled people that their disabilities only matter when it serves the narrative. It also tells them that their disability is something that could be overcome and that it should be overcome to the point of being 100% healthy with 0 symptoms in just a few months. All of these different things make a negative representation of disability, so then what makes a positive one? It's important to not have characters fall into these negative tropes, but how can we take it a step beyond that and create a positive impact with a disabled character? One of the best ways to do this is to have the character's disability be consistently prevalent and important, but still not have other main characters treat them negatively or differently for their disability. This allows all viewers to understand what the disability is and how it could affect someone, while also acknowledging that they are still a person just like everyone else. One of my favorite examples of this is Sherlock Holmes from the podcast adaptation Sherlock Co. This adaptation takes place in the modern day, and instead of Watson writing down their adventures, he records them as a true crime podcast series. In his first few minutes of meeting Watson, Holmes describes the science experiment he was working on, which may or may not have included running on a treadmill and stabbing himself in the chest, but that's not the point. Since they're going to be living together, Holmes tells Watson this.
Also, according to the DSM, I have ADHD, ASD, SPD, DMD, ODD, and DID. You have PTSD, that one I don't have. For now. I also smoke.
I don't have PTSD.
While Holmes always has eccentricities in any adaptation, this is one of the few where he explicitly has any kind of disorder or disability. It is also brought up consistently throughout the show, and he shows many different symptoms of autism and ADHD all the time. In large public areas, he can get overstimulated by the noise, so sometimes he wears ear defenders to block out some of the sound. Holmes stims, like a lot, usually by doing whatever this is with his hands while pacing.
Happy 17th birthday to Emma in Germany. Noah wants to know Sherlock's most common stim. I'd say at the moment it's definitely that one. Shout out to Victoire from Colombia.
He asks Watson to explain some social norms that he has difficulty understanding. Holmes speaks often about his hyperfixations, usually solving whatever case they have at the moment, and special interests, the art of deduction, botany, and something they acknowledge as stereotypical, trains and railway systems. He also keeps letters from fans of the show. Although Holmes is not real, to my knowledge, these letters are actual emails that were sent to the real-life creators of the Sherlock Co podcast.
Sherlock, did you keep this for sentimental value?
Yeah, more crap, apparently.
Dear Sherlock & Co. team, my sweet grandson is struggling with autism. He loves to read, and he's the light of my life.
Yeah?
Hello, if this gets read, I'd like to express just how much this podcast means to me. I'm 12 and autistic, and this, by far, has been one of the best things. Hi, I'm Kai Rose from Buffalo, NY. Sherlock has made me realise that I don't need to mask. Thank you so much for everything. I love everything about your team. Dear Sherlock. Sherlock, you keep all this?
I do. I keep things that matter to me.
Clearly, this adaptation of Sherlock Holmes has indeed had a positive effect on the autistic and neurodivergent listeners, allowing them to feel more comfortable with themselves and their disabilities. And it makes them feel like they too can do incredible things as neurodivergent people. While Holmes may be a genius detective, his autism isn't framed as the reason he can do the things he does, or something that hurts his process. Instead, he is simply an autistic detective. That's that. Dr. Watson doesn't treat him differently for his neurodivergence. Neither does their friend and co-worker/accountant, Mariana, or Commissioner Lestrade, or Inspector Gregson, or anyone else. Another way to have a more positive representation of disability is to have multiple characters who are disabled in different ways. This can show audiences the range of experience between different disabilities and how they affect different people. The Pitt is a show that takes place in the emergency department of a teaching hospital in Pittsburgh. The show has multiple disabled patients, such as Harper, a deaf patient who struggles to understand what is happening with no interpreter and a broken VRI, video remote interpreting, machine, showing the struggles that deaf patients often encounter at the hospital. Fortunately, this problem was resolved, and she was able to be discharged from the hospital. They also have multiple disabled doctors. Dr. Michael Rubinovich, aka Dr. Ravi, struggles with severe depression and suicidal thoughts. His depiction of depression is extremely accurate, even showing off symptoms that often make people who don't suffer from depression uncomfortable to think about, such as irritability and anxiety. Once the other doctors and nurses realize what's going on with him, they do everything in their power to try and support him and stop him from attempting suicide. Dr. Jack Abbott is another amazing ER doctor who also works as a field medic and was formerly a medic in the Army. Throughout the first season, he isn't treated differently compared to any of the other doctors, but in the final episode of season 1, it is revealed that he's an amputee. Dr. Melissa King, as well as her sister Becca King, are both autistic. While Becca has higher support needs and stays in a caretaking center while her sister is at work, Mel works as a doctor while dealing with sensory issues and struggling to socialize. All of these characters put together show a wide range of the experience someone can have as a disabled person, even between two people who have the same disability and are literally sisters. This allows disabled people to have a higher chance of seeing themselves represented in a show, and it gives non-disabled people the opportunity to realize that disability is often on a spectrum. Yet another way to have a more positive representation of disability is to have a character not have to change themselves in order to do something they normally couldn't do, but rather having the environment around them and the resources they have changed. While 911 does feature that storyline about Hen I mentioned earlier, it also features another disabled character, but this one is a much more positive representation. Eddie Diaz's son, Christopher Diaz, has cerebral palsy and always walks with crutches. Christopher, being an 8-year-old kid, wanted to ride a skateboard like the other kids, but because his father told him he can do anything, Chris didn't understand that his disability would make it extremely difficult to balance on and move the skateboard. Once Eddie found out that Chris got hurt trying to do this at school, he was unsure how to reassure Chris and still tell him that he's different. Buck, Eddie's best friend, told him about the famous baseball player Jim Abbott, who was born with one hand. After a lot of practice, he was able to pitch and play in the field, but Eddie says that even with practice, Chris won't be able to ride a skateboard. He ended up telling Christopher that there's going to be a lot he can't do, and a lot of things that are going to be a lot harder for him to do, but there are also a lot of things he can do better than other people. Eddie tells Chris that while he tried skateboarding and it didn't work out, maybe the next thing he tries will, but until he's older, Chris should try new things with Eddie's help in order to make sure he stays safe. So, the next day, Eddie brings Christopher to the skate park to reveal that Buck and his nanny Carla have made a device that will allow Christopher to use a skateboard. This episode is a great representation of disability because it shows parents how to talk honestly with their child about disability, and it also shows that Christopher didn't have to change himself in order to ride a skateboard like he wanted. All he needed was the right environment and the right tools, which thankfully Buck, Eddie, and Carla were able to make for him. The final way to have a positive representation that I wanted to talk about is having the disabled character be played by an actor with that same disability. The majority of disabled characters are not actually played by disabled actors, including some of the positive examples I listed in this video. This is one of the best ways to have a positive interpretation because it ensures that the representation of disability will be accurate because the actor will have some input on how that character appears on screen. It also ensures that disabled actors will be able to find a job. One example of a character played by a disabled person is Joey Lucas from The West Wing, seen here.
Are you the unmitigated jackass who has the DNC choking off funding for the O'Dwyer campaign in the California 46th?
What in God's name is happening right now?
I'm Joey Lucas.
You're Joey Lucas?
No, I'm Joey Lucas.
Help me, because I don't...
You idiot! I'm Joey Lucas.
Okay. I'm Josh Lyman.
I know who you are.
You're Joey Lucas?
What were you expecting?
Man.
I'm a woman.
You're O'Dwyer's campaign manager?
Joey Lucas is played by Marlee Matlin, who has been deaf since she was 18 months old. Joey communicates with an interpreter, named Kenny, as well as sign language and lip reading. Later on into the show, she gets into a romantic situationship, my words not theirs, with Josh Lyman, who is the strange man wearing yellow overalls in this clip. She's an incredibly intelligent campaign manager, and later on a political pollster, who basically everyone who has watched the show absolutely loves. Marlee contributed to Joey Lucas's character by ensuring that the ASL used was accurate, as well as the way that people treated her. While there are many other examples I could use of both positive and negative representations of disability, I'm going to stop here. Disability in various forms of media can have its ups and downs, but the best way to ensure that disabled people are actually represented by these characters, rather than ostracized, is to not only avoid negative tropes, but to include positive aspects in their character. Avoid making the disabled character the villain of your story, or having their disability be used as some strange superpower. Don't have a non-disabled character fake a disability, especially not one that is already malicious or evil. Don't have disabled characters be deemed as overly pure, and definitely don't have them be magically cured. What you should do is have the character not be treated differently for their disability, and have it come up within the show more than once, as disabilities are something that people have all the time, not just when it's convenient. Have your disabled character be a person of color as well, or another marginalized identity. Have multiple disabled characters in order to show a range of experiences. Show the symptoms that people don't like to talk about. Show that the problem is not them, it's that the world is not made for them, but that we still have a way to change it. Finally, if you can, have your character be played by a disabled actor. All of these put together can hopefully make a positive impact on disability across all forms of media. Thanks for watching. Bye!